Welcome at this Syllable conference. We have decided to do this in English for a change, so that it's nicer to see for the people on the internet. And the visitors have just kindly agreed. So we may have some interruptions in Dutch, but we'll try to do most of it in English. What you're seeing now is the start setup, Syllable desktop. What we're going to show today is a program where we'll use Syllable desktop and Syllable Server both. We've been trying for years to get them to work together better. And, that's the whole strategy of the project. And we need to make websites ourselves. The Syllable websites in the first place. So one of the things we're trying to solve is to make websites and run them in a complete Syllable environment. So some of our websites, we run them on Syllable Server, and that's what we're going to show today. And then we're going to access this web server from Syllable Desktop in a nicer environment. Because Syllable Server is Linux and it's still quite bare bones. And the integration is at a new level now because we have Rebel 3 running on both systems now. So we're building our websites in Rebel 3 and we're hosting them on Syllable Server where they run on a web server that's written in Rebel 2. And we're now able to build those websites on Syllable Desktop in Rebel 3. Is that clear so far?
Ja.
Kijkt een beetje moeilijk. Kunnen jullie het volgen? Of?
I can follow it, yeah.
Okay. That was the first Dutch interruption. Bas, denk je dat het geluid er goed opkomt als ik jullie kant uitpraat? Of,
op zich wel, maar ik denk dat het geen kwaad kan om iets luider te praten.
Nog luider.
Maar en trouwens, het zou natuurlijk niet verkeerd zijn zeg maar, om daar naartoe te praten, maar ik denk niet dat het helemaal niet erop staat als je het vindt.
Ik denk dat je je primair op de opname moet richten.
Dat was zo schreeuwen. Someone was asking earlier about our progress, and the point is that it's true that our progress is rather unclear the past years because we've extended the project from Syllable Desktop to Syllable Server, and we're trying to have them cooperate. And we think this is a rather unique project strategy because the other projects are more focused on one thing. The competing desktop projects are just building a desktop operating system, and the Linux distributions are of course building Linuxes that you can use as a workstation or as a server. But Linux has become rather server oriented, so the point of building a desktop system is that it's a better desktop system than Linux. So we have this two-pronged strategy now because we don't want to be without a server. The other pure desktop operating systems, they don't have a server. So we're still using Linux for the server, but to broaden the project in that way takes a lot of extra work, of course. And it takes some time to get the results to show. So for the past few years we've been working on stuff under the hood to get to the extra server system and to get them to cooperate. And during that time we had to move away from the rhythm of Syllable Desktop releases. We used to have a Syllable Desktop release every 3, sometimes even 2 months. And people like that because they can see that there's a little progress every few months. But it's easier to develop in longer stretches. And we've been going for a decade now, and after such a long time people start to doubt whether we'll ever amount to something. start leaving for other systems. During that time, Linux has become better, it has become usable in some situations. So there's a combination of that, the visible progress is now coming in longer stretches, and competing systems are drawing people away. So the progress has become less visible and I think less convincing for many people. And we couldn't do a lot about that, because if people leave the project as well, then of course less work gets done, and we have to compensate for that. And it's a lot of work, so it takes time to do that. But we've been working on the new strategy for several years now, and I think we're getting to the point that we can show some more results. And I think it's a nice demonstration to have the two systems working together to actually build a website and serve it too. Heb je daar een beetje mee eens? And it's
what's the advantage of this video system of yours in the X video system of Linux?
Our graphics system.
Yeah.
Well, that's especially our strongest point. Another nice effect of having the extra Linux system is that you can very precisely compare against Linux. And the past 1 or 2 years I've done that in demonstrations, show this is Syllable Desktop, it behaves this way. Then start Syllable Server on the same computer and show that it behaves a different way on the very same hardware. And one thing that's very noticeable is that the Linux kernel takes a lot longer to start. But the Linux kernel is robust, so the Linux Syllable Server system is a lot more robust than the desktop system. So a necessary quality for a server, but it starts a lot slower. But the biggest advantage is in the graphics system, because once you have started the Linux kernel, you still have to start X and the desktop environment with all its toolkits and little applications to get to a desktop like this. And a year ago we've created Syllable, a graphical version of Syllable Server for ourselves, and I don't think you've seen that yet, have you?
No.
So I can shortly show it in a while, but the past year we've been doing that. We've been showing the graphical Syllable Server, and then you can see the differences very well. And the interesting thing is we used Rock's Desktop. Anyone know that? Soon has seen
Yes,
it.
yes, I see it.
Rock's Desktop is a very small and efficient desktop for X for Linux. So our desktop on Syllable Server actually starts quite fast, but because it's a very lean Linux desktop. The regular desktops, GNOME and KDE and even XFCE, they take a lot longer to start. So that's what you notice every time that you switch the machine on. And with all the small netbooks coming into vogue now, that's increasingly important. But the real advantage is when you are started and you write native syllable programs, the X graphics system is very old design.
Yeah.
It's from the early 80s, I think.
Yeah.
And it was for Unix workstations. And the strange thing about it is that 30 years ago it ran on much smaller machines, and it wasn't really slow, it wasn't really fast either. If you compared it to the Commodore Amiga of the time, for example, it wasn't as responsive, but it did its job. But the weird thing about X is that if you put it on stronger, faster hardware, the computers are almost 1,000 times faster now than what X used to run on in the beginning. But X doesn't really become faster with faster hardware. And there are things in the design, and we've thought about it for years, and I know reasonably well what they are now, but there are things in the design of X, the way it communicates between applications through the X server and through the window manager, and the way that communication is scheduled by the kernel, that it doesn't immediately do what you ask it to do, because this communication is scheduled, and then other tasks on the machine also get a chance to run in between. So the strange thing is that if you put X on a faster machine, it still doesn't immediately do what you want in the user interface.
Would you compare it to bureaucracy in governance?
Yeah, could be. You could compare it with doorlooptijd. The time it takes to get through a process. And the thing is, if you want a fast user interface, then the user interface always needs to get priority. If you click on something, the whole system needs to be focused in that moment on executing that click, on going from that click through the entire system with kernel context switches through the graphics server to change the screen, to draw it again based on the click you just made. And the thing about X is that too much happens in between. And if you put it on a faster machine, there's still stuff happening in between before the effect of the mouse click is drawn. So if you put it on a faster machine, that machine has the ability to do more in between than a slower machine. So the effect is that more is done before your click is handled, and it's still as slow as it was 30 years ago. So 30 years ago it was usable, but it wasn't as responsive as systems like the Amiga. And 30 years later it's still usable, but not as responsive as systems that are fully focused on executing your UI with priority.
Do you need that speed in games or in movies, or what's the use for more space?
I write a lot of emails every day, so
the speed of the screen is not...
That's a very good question, because the fact that X is usable, and it was usable 30 years ago, it means you can use it for stuff. Lots of people do. And these days you can run movies on it, so that's not really a problem. Doing office work was never a problem with X, and movies with the more powerful machines, the movies aren't a real problem anymore. If you execute X nicely on a good system, it can still be a problem in many Linux distributions. That's because there are too many disturbances in them. If you execute X nicely on a good Linux distribution, then movies are not a problem.
Oh.
So indeed, there are different things for which you need a different graphics system, and games is one of them. In games you have a lot of interaction, because with movies you don't have interaction. You have a lot of raw processing. You start the movie once, and then you have to process that stream, so you need a fast machine. And then the only thing you need to guarantee is that it's not delayed. And in modern systems, X gives a lot of that task as directly to the video card as possible. So you get a channel quite straight from the movie player to the video card, especially if it works through 3D, but also with 2D hardware overlays. You have a faster route to the video card. And then all the interactive stuff that X does doesn't really play into it.
No.
Because for movies the focus is less on that. but it can be that if you want to play a movie and you want to do editing on it, then you have a combination. So a video editor, then it becomes a problem, because if you want to make your movie smooth, all the priority goes to the rendering of the movie, and then the interactive behavior of X becomes worse, because rendering the movie is one of those things that happens in between before your mouse click is processed. So if you're just watching a movie, then X is not really a problem these days. But if you want to program a video editor, then it becomes a problem. And if you program games, it's a problem. And it's one of the big reasons that Linux has not broken through in game playing. And that's why there are big fights in the Linux kernel organization about the scheduler to use, for example. Because there are several things. Part of this, it's really quite complicated, because part of this is due to the scheduling, so that's in the kernel, and part of it is the way the graphics server does its communication, and that communication is scheduled by the server, so by the kernel, so it's a combination.
It's priorities.
Yeah, it's a combination of what the graphics server does and how the kernel schedules it. So you can the interactive performance on Linux can be improved by better scheduling, and it can be improved by tweaks to X. But the basic architecture of X is such that it's not very suitable for multimedia, and especially game playing and editing of videos, stuff like that, a combination of things. Yeah?
When I play a movie at Virtual Desktop 2 and I'm doing some things on Virtual Desktop 1, is then still on Syllable the whole movie being processed while I'm not seeing it?
That's also an interesting question, because I'm not entirely sure, but a few months ago I was noticing it, and I've noticed it before, and my impression is that if you, on Syllable, even if you just minimize a window where a video is playing, then the rendering to the window is not done anymore, so your CPU usage goes down. But if I do that on most Linux systems, it keeps rendering in the background, even if the window is not being shown. So that's one of the things that I'm not entirely sure, but my impression is that this is different between Syllable and Linux systems. And that's probably a difference between X and the Syllable graphic system.
But when I switch with Alt-Tab, I switch between virtual desktops, or with, no, it's not the right word,
Alt number keys.
Yeah, but when I switch between multiple different virtual desktops, then I still see the video being played in the switching system.
Yeah, and but that's different. That's a snapshot of the window that's being.
Yeah, but the window, the movie keeps playing.
The Alt tab, but that's the Alt tab screen.
Yeah.
But
so it is. So I guess it is so responsive that when it knows that it is in the window, when it is visible, it is being played.
Yeah, that's a nice gimmick. But the most interesting thing about it is that some new Linux systems do similar things, because OS X does these kind of things, so other people want to imitate Apple in such things, in such animations. But Linux systems need 3D for that. And we never really understood that, because you can also do it with 2D. So we don't have 3D yet, so Syllable simply does it with 2D.
Yeah, we already do it for 6 years or so.
Yeah. We did it when Linux systems couldn't do it.
And what exactly do you need to do with what Linux does with 3D and Syllable with 2D?
A lot of advanced graphics operations on Linux can only be done if you have 3D installed and run well. And we don't really know why that is. It's just because X was never an advanced multimedia system. So when X was still 2D, advanced things weren't done with it. Mostly because if you try to do them, they're not smooth. And the way things are being done smoothly now on Linux is if you have 3D working. 3D is still a problem.
3D on Linux still uses X, or?
Yeah, it uses X, but as I said before, if you do 2D on X, it all goes through X.
Yeah.
And X, and then you get these scheduling problems, so things are not smooth. Even resize things like resizing windows. But 3D on Linux on X has a much more direct path from the 3D rendering in an application to the video card. So you mostly go around X, and that's why X is less of a problem. But that's why to do advanced video effects on Linux you need a 3D system, because you can only get things smooth if you have the 3D running. And Syllable can do things smoothly just with 2D. So that's one of the differences. That's one of the effects you get.
This does mean that you, with Syllable, to have smooth things in 3D in Linux way, that you don't need a 3D card to...
Yeah, because we were doing many of these things many years ago, when Linux hardly had any 3D working. And 3D is still a problem. So if you don't have a fully functional 3D system, a lot of these advanced graphics things are out of your reach on Linux. And we can do a lot of that in 2D.
I think 3D is working nice on
if
computers.
If everything fits, if you have a new machine with a graphics card that's well supported by Linux and by X, but many cards are not well supported.
Okay.
3D is a big problem on open source systems. Linux is the only one that has it more or less working these days.
Yeah.
Just a few weeks ago on OS News on the website, there was an article about they were trying something new with 3D. Oh yeah, Firefox 4. Firefox 4 has 3D support, and they can't get it to work on Linux, except for one video card with one video driver, and all the others are too buggy. So on the new Firefox 4 you'll get 3D, but not on Linux, because 3D is a problem on Linux. 3D only works well on Windows and on Apple. And on Apple it works well because you buy a machine from Apple and you get both the hardware and the software from Apple, and they have had the chance to make it work together. And on Windows it works because the market is Windows. If you sell software or hardware, it has to work on Windows or it won't sell. So that's how you get it to work on Windows, and you get it to work on Apple because you buy everything in one machine from Apple. And all the other things, 3D is a problem. It's been a problem for many years. And now the next thing, they've solved some things. 3D compositing of the desktop is now reasonable on Linux. But now the next problem is Firefox. Firefox 4 3D won't work on Linux except for one video card.
And video, the NVIDIA is enough memory?
I don't remember which video card, but there was only one that they said worked reasonably well, and they can't support the others right now because they're too buggy.
Okay.
And it's been like that for years, and it will probably be solved 2 years from now, but that means that it only works on the newest machines with the newest video cards and the newest video drivers and the newest Linux distribution. And then probably only the few top Linux distributions, because it's too difficult for everyone to get it to work. So yeah, it's always the case in Linux. They say, yeah, it works, but that means that it only works in that very ideal situation that they've just gotten it to work. And in all the other situations, it doesn't work.
Yeah. I know.
And okay.
That's why you're here now.
And that's a thing where Syllable is different. Well, there are many things in Syllable that don't work yet, but they're different things. Because if you build a new system and you do the whole stack yourself, you get different kinds of problems. And the problem, you get a lot of things to work that are a huge problem on Linux. But on the other hand, things on Syllable don't work because they're simply not finished yet. So you get different kinds of problems and different kinds of things that don't work. So it all depends. But they're really, they're quite different systems with different characters. So our idea is our strategy is to use the system for the task that it's most suited for. So that's why we added a Linux system as a server, because Linux is definitely much better at working as a server in the first place, because Syllable Desktop is not stable yet. You can't have that on a server. So the project for today, the websites. If you want to serve a website yourself, your own server, you probably need to start with the server. And we've started in Syllable Desktop here now, but I'm going to restart the machine in Syllable Server so we can set up the web server. Start hij nou niet?
Ik doe er eigenlijk wat.
Oh, yeah.
Oh yeah, I remember. Yesterday I noticed that this laptop has a problem with rebooting Syllable Desktop. It hangs, so I have to power cycle it.
By the way, this is one of the first clay tablets before the iPad. That is a tablet computer.
Okay.
It was the Windows tablet from 2000.
If you watch this, you can see how long it takes to start, and it takes about 3 times as long as starting Syllable Desktop. This is a standard Linux kernel boot.
So the kernel is now booted.
It's booting.
Oh.
Yeah. On a regular Syllable server, the latest 0.4 version, you can't log in as the root user. And the root user is now called system because we think that's much clearer. So the system is the root user, and on standard Syllable Server you can't log into the root account. But I've enabled this here because the graphical version is also on here. And for people who haven't seen that yet, I'll quickly demonstrate our graphical version. It's not released because it's not finished enough, but we're using this ourselves internally. And in the past year we've thrown out all the other Linux distributions out of our house. We're now exclusively using our own Syllable Linux distribution. It still fits in the screen. This is a higher, this is 1024 resolution, I think. Oh, even more. It's okay.
Ja, ik zoom even in.
No. I'm adapting this. 800.
That's better.
It's more visible. Oh no, I should have done 1024. The desktop icons are placed so that you have them in a good place at this resolution, 1024. This is our internal graphical version of Syllable Server. This is done by cobbling together a lot of stuff from the Linux software pool. The Gobo Linux package manager is running on Syllable Server here, and from that we have installed X11. So this is X11 running, and on top of that we've installed the ROX desktop through the Zero install package manager that comes from the ROX project. So this is Syllable Server with Gobo Linux on top, with ROX desktop on top through Zero install. And it's a desktop that's rather unknown, but we like it a lot, and it's also it resembles Syllable quite a lot, and I've always taken inspiration from this in making proposals for Syllable desktop. And we're using this now.
I think it rocks.
Mm-hmm.
They are still maintained now?
Pardon?
They are still maintained now?
ROX.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's a one-man project.
Okay.
So there are people collaborating, but it's really a project that was founded by one person, just like Syllable when it was Atheos, and that usually leads to much cleaner projects. So ROX is a quite clean desktop. It's very efficient. Its efficiency is comparable to OpenBox, which has become popular recently. Memory usage is low, for example. It's now using about less than 64 megabytes with the desktop started and a few applications. So this is Syllable Server with graphics, has memory usage, has resource usage requirements that are comparable to Windows 2000. So 10 years later, we still have the same requirements, but we're running on the latest Linux software. So I think that's a pretty good result, personally.
And for example, Firefox and Thunderbird just work on it. So I use this at home. I just use Firefox and consider Thunderbird.
And we don't have a network connection, so it's not going to work, but we can start it. Firefox is huge, of course, so it still takes a considerable time to start because this is not a very new laptop. So we don't get a connection, but this is Firefox 3.5 because that's the version that is in Gobo Linux at the moment. And one thing you can see, this, when you drag a window on X, so for example on Linux, you get this lagging. The redrawing isn't instantaneous. And that's because it's software rendering through the X pipeline that's not very efficient. So this is not 3D, this is 2D. So this does not do the modern 3D compositing, and this would probably be much smoother with 3D compositing because then each window is probably a 3D texture, and then you send the entire window to the graphics card, and then the graphics card composites them. So then you don't get this 2D software tearing. But this is really, this is X. You get enormous delays in rendering because it doesn't get the right priority. We have Thunderbird as well, and Alpme, our communication system written in Rebel. Oh, I haven't started this yet on this installation, so I've got to do a very simple install now, and then it won't get a connection either. But normally you'd be able to fill in a world name here and your name and password and connect to a communication world. And that's one of the reasons that we wanted this graphical version, because we are running these communication servers ourselves, and we were running them on Ubuntu, but Ubuntu is much heavier, and we wanted to put this on our own Linux so that the resource usage on the hardware is much lighter. And to do that, we needed to run graphics, because this is a graphical communication system. It's cross-platform, so it also runs on Windows. But we wanted to run on our Linux server, of course. So now that we have X running, we have our own Alpme servers running on our own Linux at home. So that's what we're using for communication within the Syllable project and the other BUS projects like Software Freedom Day and Document Freedom Day.
To show Mozilla Thunderbird?
Yeah, I think people know how it looks, but
I know how it looks.
it takes a long time to start as well. Now it needs to go through the install, so I'm not going to do that. See this still Thunderbird.
Sorry?
You should do it on the desktop installation, not on the server installation.
That's true, but
This is the server installation, so there's no need to demonstrate it here.
we use, this is running on Syllable Server, but we use this as our desktop. But this is my desktop. It looks like this.
Okay.
When I send you emails, it all comes from this.
The native ROX programs, they start much faster because they're much lighter. And even though most of them are written in Python, most of ROX is written in Python, but even then programs are much faster. So Firefox and Thunderbird are really huge. And Alpme is written in Rebel, so it's also much smaller and faster. We have some parts of XFCE in it, such as the media player. And there are some nice graphical effects here. If I click this, I can fold my windows to view the desktop. Should open a few more and you can see the effects. Oh, I need different ones. There's a filer. So now I have two. And then you get nice effects. Well, that was a short demo of the graphical Syllable Server that we're using in-house. And I could do the web server demo here in the terminal, but I would like to make it a real Syllable Server demo. So I would like to do it from the console if you have the Syllable Server version that you can download, because this graphical version is not released. So I'm going to reboot. Also takes a lot longer than rebooting Syllable Desktop.
camera verschoten.
Goed.
Nee, ga maar door. Stel ik in de bank.
This is a Syllable kernel or a Linux kernel?
This is a Linux kernel. This is Syllable Server again. Same system as with ROX. But we're going to pretend now that this is a stock Syllable Server without graphics. So on the latest Syllable Server you can't log in as root. You have to log in as the administrator account, which is also predefined. The default password is Open Sesame. And if we look now how much memory we're using, it's 25 megabytes. And this is on a machine that has a gigabyte, and if the machine has fewer memory, the kernel takes less as well. So on our 192 megabyte laptops, I think this is something like 18 megabytes what it's using in the console just after starting. So it's really quite lean. I don't know if you can get that effect by cutting out stuff out of Ubuntu.
Didn't try because I have plenty of memory, so.
Well, actually, I know the answer. You can't do that. I have plenty of memory here too. I have a megabyte here, but I don't need it. So if the system is lean, there will be more memory for your server applications. If you're running a lot of websites on this or a lot of Alchemy servers, it'll have more memory, so it'll be faster, or you can host more accounts on the same server, so it's simply cheaper. It's cheaper and faster if the system doesn't take half of the memory. Because if you do this with Windows Vista, you'll take 400 or 500 megabytes, you'll take half of the gigabyte that's in here after just starting. Whereas if you start ROX Desktop here, then you're taking 64 megabytes, just like Windows 2000. So that's Windows now takes at least 8 times as much. Windows Vista, and I've heard that Windows 7 doesn't work well if there's not more than a gigabyte in your machine. So it seems that you need 2 gigabytes for Windows 7. So apparently it takes more than half a gigabyte for Windows 7. So Windows Vista takes about 8 times as much memory as this. And apparently Windows 7 takes, 15 times as much memory. So why? If you just want to run a server, you want to use that memory for your websites, not for the operating system. And if you're running a desktop, you want to use it for your applications instead of for the system. Why does it need so much memory?
Well, for a server, you don't need the visual things.
Yeah, but if
you need to handle requests.
yeah, but for
the number of the requests is bottleneck, and responding on the requests needs this kind of memory.
yeah, but you win in all cases. If you run a server on Syllable Server, you start with 25 MB memory use on a gigabyte machine. And if you need to run a desktop, you start with 64 MB memory use. And that's all an order of magnitude less than Windows. So either way you win. Whether you want to run a server or a desktop, you win, because not all your memory is used by the system. It makes smaller machines much faster if you have more memory for your programs. Well, anyway, the web server. I'm logged in now to the administrator account, and the administrator account is not the root account, but it is meant for administration. So what is done is that you're supposed to use sudo for system maintenance commands, and there's a convenient abbreviation, an alias for it that's just S. So it's not much more difficult than really using the root account, but it's much safer. And the administrator account has this easy sudo access. So this is a safe way to administer a Syllable Server system. And we want to set up a web server. So we'll see what's running on this machine right now. This is the process list, and if you look towards the bottom, you see there are a lot of system processes. HAL is running, and that's only because the graphical system is on here. On a normal Syllable server there is no HAL, so it would even use less memory on a real Syllable server. But near the bottom we can see that the SSH server is already running, the SSH server from OpenSSH. That is standard on Syllable Server. We assume that you're going to run it as a server and that you'll want to access it from other systems. So by default the SSH server is already running. We want to set up a web system, so basically a standard web hosting system. So in any case we'll need a web server, and if you want to upload your websites remotely in a standard way, we also need an FTP server. So the SSH server is already running for advanced access to your account. Now we want to add a web server and an FTP server, and then we have a little web provider set up when we've done that. Now how do we do that? The regular way, of course, is to read the documentation. There's an M alias for more, or actually less. So this is a fast alias to the less pager. There's a documentation main directory. This is what's in it on Syllable Server. And this is the manual of the system. So we're going to set up a server, and Syllable Server is already installed, so the first part of the manual has already been done. But there is a difference because by default Syllable Server is installed with a network configuration based on DHCP. So it gets its own IP number from a DHCP server. And we're not connected here, plus we want to set up a server, and the server should have a fixed IP address. So we must change the network configuration to a static IP configuration. Well, that's in the installation part of the manual. And then the second part of the manual is setting it up as a server. And that's what we want to do next. It starts with OpenSSH. And then a bit further on there's how to set up the web server and the FTP server that we want. And it's basically already, it's installed, it's included in Syllable Server, so it's installed and it's pre-configured. So basically we only need to activate it. So we can simply consult the manual to see how exactly it's done. So I'm going to skip to the network configuration. Configuring the network. And there it says which file you need to edit to change it from DHCP to a static configuration.
Right, stel voor dat we over 10 minuten even pauze hebben, want dan loopt die tape af.
Ja, is goed. Pause in 10 minutes. So we can do the network configuration in that time, I think. Now the problem is, of course, that we're reading the manual in the console, and we would like to keep our position, and we're not in the graphical environment anymore because we are installing a simple Syllable Server, and this is probably going to be a box that you'll put in the corner of your office, and you'll mostly forget about it as long as the power is on and the network is connected. So we're configuring this in the console. So we don't have a terminal window, so we can't start another window to do the configuration. And the way Syllable does that in the console is that you have multiple virtual consoles. And this is all standard Linux with Alt left and Alt right. You can go to the other consoles, and you see that there's a new login there. And I think by default there are 6 consoles, so you sort of have 6 windows, but in a character mode console. And I have to log in again. And Linux is, of course, a multi-user system, so it's no problem to log in more than once under the same name. Open Sesame. So with Alt left I can go back to my manual, and with Alt right I'm in my second console where I can do the things that are asked in the manual. And included is a nice editor, MC-Edit, the Midnight Commander editor. And then I refer back to the file I needed to edit, etc. sysconfig, network devices, ifconfig, ether 0, first Ethernet card, IP4. It's mentioned without a starting slash here because this is written for the installation, but we're already installed, so we need the file from the root of the file system now. I use the tab key a lot to complete long names. IP4. The Midnight Commander editor is a lot like the old Norton Commander program.
Yeah, but you need a home directory for the init file of that MC command.
A home directory for the
so what home directory do you use now? The Web Manager?
Yeah,
Okay.
I'll show it in a minute when we're out of the editor again. The configuration is already in there. If I put a hash in front of the DHCP client line, it's deactivated, and then I have to activate the static configuration. And then you see that the default IP address and other parameters are already filled in. So if I don't change this, the server will get the number 9 address on a small private network. Just like in Norton Commander, I think I can do F10, save it. Oh, here's the thing I forgot. This is what I was telling. I do escape to get out, and I say don't save, because we're in the administrator account and it doesn't have access to the system files. So this was for my own safety. The question about where we are, print the working directory.
Well, if you have a home directory with the image files and the directory of that MC, then it works even if you are administrator. But you have to install it first on your own account.
It is installed.
Okay.
Everything's installed.
Okay.
I can just start Midnight Commander. The thing I forgot is that if I want to edit that system configuration file, I need to prefix it with superdo or just S on Syllable Server, because otherwise it can't write the file back. So this was the system protection at work. And now I can save it. Now the file is saved. The rest is probably okay. The machine name is pre-configured.
Well, but did you have as administrator? You opened up that MC. That MC has to write now in the directory of only allowed by a root account.
Yeah.
So you should have opened, if you can write on this way, and it's quite dangerous, you should have opened it like sudo and say then you have the rights to write. Or otherwise it should not be capable to write.
I just did. The first time that I opened the system file, I forgot superdo.
Okay.
So I wasn't allowed to write it.
Okay.
And the second time I added superdo, but we have an alias for it on Syllable Server that's just S. So I added S for superdo. Then I could write it.
Okay.
So there was no problem. You could do a static DNS configuration, but there's no point to it because we don't have a connection anyway. So this should be the entire configuration that's needed to make it static. So we'll see if we still have enough videotape left to see if I can skip to the web server configuration in the second part of the manual. Using server. Using Syllable Server as a server. Well, here it says that the OpenSSH server is already running and how to get at it. If you want, you can install your own. The DHCP is already installed, so you can run your own DHCP server. If you would want to run your own DNS server, you'd have to install bind and configure it. So you can really complete this. If you need more than just a web server, you can complete it with other standard server tasks. But we're now only going to show the web provider configuration. Here's the web server thing. And the default, the standard web server we've selected is Cheyenne because it's written in Rebel. In Rebel 2, hopefully it will be ported to Rebel 3 sometime. That will simplify our software configuration even more. But the nice thing about a web server written in Rebel is that it's very efficient in executing Rebel tasks because it has the option of running requests written in Rebel within the process space of the server. So that's a very efficient way to execute a web application. and it's also very easy to maintain, and it's running from the Rebel source code of Cheyenne. So I have been making fixes and enhancements to the web server and sent them into to the upstream project. So a few of my enhancements are in Cheyenne now. And it's really very easy to do because the Rebel source code of Cheyenne is on your disk and it runs from the Rebel source code. So you can simply edit the text files of the Cheyenne program to make changes. It's really very nice. It's a pretty extensive web server. The author says it is Apache class, so it's really a serious project.
It works together with PHP and MySQL.
Well, it could, but we don't like PHP in MySQL, so we're not using it in that configuration. And to use Cheyenne with PHP, you need to make a patch to PHP. There's a patch available from the Cheyenne website for PHP. So if you want to run PHP on Cheyenne, you have to make a small patch to it, because there is a problem, something with PHP process management, I believe. So you can run PHP on it, and the author of Cheyenne does that, because on the Cheyenne website, which is mentioned here somewhere at the bottom, I think. Here at the bottom is the Cheyenne website, and the author is running a small wiki that's written in PHP. So if you really want to, you can run PHP on Cheyenne, but we're not particularly interested in that because we try to integrate our systems by using Rebel as much as possible.
What development board system it can be used for? Unless it's the system or something.
The PHP one?
Yeah.
They are running, what's it called? Something with an M. I don't know. We've also set it up as a